Welcome back to Coffee and Tea with CarrieVee. I'm CarrieVee, your biggest fan, and this podcast is all things leadership, communication, confidence, clarity, and life. And joining us today to talk about life and her journey is Andrea Sampson. And if you're not watching this podcast on YouTube and you're just listening, let me just tell you that you need to head to my YouTube channel so that you can look at Andrea's hair and her smile and her crocheted sweater that she made, and just the beauty and the radiance and the joy that is just vibing off of this amazing person. So Andrea, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Carrie. And you just warm my heart and brings tears to my eyes. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you so
you're
much for
welcome.
your kind words. That is so generous of you.
You're very welcome. They are all sincere. Your smile got me as soon as we popped onto this interview. So tell us, what is waking you up these days and making you want to jump out of bed and say, life is amazing?
I talk a lot about this, which is helping thought leaders, really. And maybe that sounds a bit trite because that is what I do, but I love what I do.
Yes.
Every day I get to work with people who are actually creating change and impact in the world. And it is my favorite thing in the world. I spent most of my career in advertising, and
Mhm.
it's a great career and I loved it until one day I didn't. And
Mhm.
what happened for me is that I kind of woke up and realized that I was an idealist in a capitalist world and I needed to make a change. And
Mhm.
so this idea today of where I am and the work that I do, that I get to wake up every day and work with people who are, actually changing our future. I feel so privileged and honored to do that.
Yes.
And to help them to define the work so the rest of us can know what it is. Because, working with scientists and academics and technologists and artists who are doing really, really amazing work, they are often so busy doing that work that not only are they not telling the rest of us about it, but when they do, we don't understand a word they say. And so
Yes.
that's the work I get to do. So it wakes me up every day knowing that I'm going to help somebody else understand that our future actually is hopeful. And the way that they're going to understand that is by some of the people who I've worked with.
That is, I mean, I like chills going down my spine. I was actually speaking with one of my one-on-one clients this morning, and we were talking about this very strong feeling of hopelessness in the world around us. So, do you have a method that you work with your clients on to help them increase their influence in the world? Or how is it that you accomplish this in order to get it out there in the world for all of us to learn?
Yeah, and so yes, I do have a methodology that I work with. I mean, I spent a number of years working in the TED world. So I was a TEDx organizer, a TEDx speakers
Okay.
coach. I've worked with many, many, many TEDx and TED speakers. And in doing that work, when we think about TED Talks, what is it that we love about them? Well, we love two things. One, we love that we learn something that we didn't know, right? We all
Mhm.
come away going, oh, wow, that was really interesting. But we learn it because the speakers tell a story, and the story is what we relate to. And so when I'm working with my clients, what we're doing is telling stories. And we're telling stories that have ideas embedded deeply in them. I call it idea-centric storytelling. And so what we're doing first actually is I work with my clients to identify what is the idea, what is the core thought leadership that they're bringing out into the world. And that is usually something that is deeply held and very difficult to communicate because it's often layered under, first of all, training, because so many of them have lots and lots of training,
Yeah.
but also passion, and also this fear of saying it out loud because maybe it's not true. And so when we surface it, it's usually a very emotional thing of like, that is what I stand for in the world. It's what I want to do. It is what I want to change. And we have a methodology for that of creating what I call an idea, which
Mhm.
is a three-step framework. And so it's iterative, so I'm moving them through it until we find the exact words And usually that's a moment. And then once we have that, then what we're doing is finding ways to communicate it so other people understand it. And story, of course, is the most powerful way of doing that, because we are hardwired for stories as humans. We've been telling them since we lived in caves and meet over campfires.
Yes.
So stories are something that we deeply, deeply connect to. So my methodology starts with that. There's many other things we do, but that is the beginning of it.
So what would you say to someone who says to you, and I'm going to play that, I'm going to play this card because I also work with people on stories, and this is what I hear all the time. I really don't have any stories. What I can tell this one struck a nerve. So let's go here. What do you say to someone who comes to you and says, "But I don't really have any stories?"
Well, and I hear that all the time. Same
Yes.
thing. Like I
Yeah.
hear that people come to me, especially when I'm working with people in very technical areas,
Mhm.
scientists and like doctors and you're like, and well, the first thing I say to them is, well, first of all, our whole lives are just one big story.
Yes.
That's that we live, and the reality is we all live the same lives. It's just the details that are different. And so,
Mm.
like
Oh, wait, say that again. I want everybody to really get that. Just say that.
we all live the same lives. It's just the details that are different. Those are the stories.
Yes.
The thing is, like, we all have parents, whether we grew up with them or not. We came from parents. Most of us have, whether it be siblings or cousins or friends who are like siblings. We go to schools. We experience love and loss. We have jobs that are meaningful or not. These are all the details. These are the stories inside of the lives that we live. And so when we understand that, so that's number one, understanding that our lives are just one long story. And then you go, okay, so where do you start? And that's where your idea comes. Because here's the thing, what the idea does, what that core idea, that core thought leadership is, it is usually in some way archetypal or metaphoric, in
Yeah.
that it is helping us to understand something. And so our stories hold it in a way that explain it. They become context or backdrop for that idea. And so what we are looking for at a time in your life, where maybe it was where you loved and lost, or maybe it was where you understood something in a way that just changed you. And so we look for these moments in our lives where we can then take it out and pull it out and look at it under a microscope and build that story of your life in a way that can hold that idea. And
Yeah.
when we're doing it in that way, we have a framework, a very simple framework for the story, so that it's easy for people to tell it. Because and I just recently, last week actually, I hosted a live salon in one of the cities that I work in often, and I had to tell my story, or a story from my life. And doing that, it's not easy finding the moment, because we do live,
Mhm.
long lives. I've
Yes.
had over 50 years in this world of like stories that I can draw from. And I worked with one of my own coaches to help me go,
Yes.
where's the moment? And he helped me to find that one moment to hold my idea. And it was a powerful moment for me as a coach, of being coached, of course,
Yes.
when somebody else is doing it, but you hear your own story told back to you. And that is something that so few of us ever hear. And when we hear it told outside of our own brain, suddenly we hear the power. So
Yeah.
so that's what I say when somebody says to me, I don't have a story. I usually laugh a little bit and then say, well, your whole life is a story. So let's just find a starting point.
Yeah. So I love that. I love that answer. And about we're all living the same life. It's just the details that are different. That is, I mean, you blew my mind on that. So I'm just gonna I'm gonna be journaling on that later for sure. So do you believe that we all have one or maybe two or three, I don't know, signature stories? And then the other stories we have kind of support that signature story. I hear this terminology a lot. Your signature story. What is your signature story?
I think you can make I think you can make any story a signature story. It's really just how often are you telling it? Like truly signature stories are stories that you're telling over and over again. And
Okay.
often what they are is a pivotal moment in our lives where we learned something really powerful. But we don't have just one, two, or three. Like, there are so many. The thing
Yes.
is, it's just going to find them. That's all. And
Mhm.
and and even in the moment when we're living them, sometimes, especially once you've learned the concept of signature stories, um, when you're living through one, you start to realize, here I am. And you're like, I'm not sure I wanted to be living a signature story right now, but here it is. I
Yes.
mean, certainly, collectively, we all went through a signature story in 2020,
Yes.
and there's so much richness in that story. None of us really wanted to go through that. Let's
No.
all be clear. And so many of us, had trauma with it.
Yes.
And so, but in that, it's a shared moment. And so we can go to those places where we know it's shared. That one we know because it was a global issue. But
Yes.
even when we find a moment in our lives we know that everyone has in some way experienced this. Like I said, whether it's like, a lost love or a childhood issue, these are things that we have all experienced. And why that's important is because when we tell a story, there's a lot of brain science behind story. I do a lot of work with neuroscientists, and I got to learn lots about this. But one of the things that happens when we are telling a story is we're actually activating our brain. Okay, and so our brain lights up with electrical activity, and specifically, it lights up in the sensory cortices within our brain. But what's happening is when you're telling your story, my brain is filling in images from my life in your story. So I'm seeing myself in your story. And that is powerful, right? Because now it's a shared experience, even though it was your story. And this is where I was saying, we all live the same life. It's just the details that are different. When we have those shared experiences, when I'm remembering the time when, and you're telling me the time when, we now connect. And our brains
Mhm.
actually, interestingly, our brains actually align. It's something called neurocoupling and sorry, neuromirroring is what happens. So my brain and your brain actually start to mirror each other because
Yeah.
I'm thinking the same thing you're thinking. And it's a really cool thing to happen when I'm listening to a story that you're telling, or vice versa.
That is so incredibly powerful. So when you are helping someone tell a story, or craft their story, and you run into a piece that maybe they are hesitant to share, how do you handle that? I mean, I love hearing stories, and I'm sure most people do because I do put myself in that story, like you just said.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, the pieces that I'm really putting myself in are those struggles that they go through. And yet, I find that there's a lot of people who just struggle with sharing their struggles. How do you help people through that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things because you're right. Like the moment of vulnerability, that moment is so powerful for us as an audience, right?
Mhm.
Because we see that person not as a speaker or a thought leader or an expert. We see them as a human in that moment.
Yes.
And that is where we connect human to human. But the first thing is making sure that they are ready to share it. So, there another saying that I love is I didn't make this one up, but I use it all the time, which is, we need to teach from our scars and not our wounds. And
Mm,
so part of what I need to do when I'm helping somebody find those places in their story is to make sure that it is a scar. Because if it's too fresh, they're going to traumatize themselves and they're going to traumatize the audience because the audiences
yes,
worry for us, right? So what we don't want is to have that moment be so overwhelming. So it
yes,
has to be healed enough that we can talk about it. Now, that doesn't mean that it's completely, hey, it doesn't bother us anymore. The reality is what I feel as a speaker, you feel as an audience. So I need
mhm,
to be able to feel it. And that's important. And so even in a situation where we've healed from it, sometimes, when it is like, I mean, I talk about my mom all the time. My mom died a couple of years ago, and it's a hard memory, right?
Mhm.
But I still feel it. I still feel her loss deeply, but I can talk about it. I can talk
Yes.
about her. I can even talk about, and I have often talked about the moment of her death and what it meant for me. And those, like I said, are hard to do, but so important because there's learning in those moments. The passing of a parent, which many of us have experienced or will experience in our lives, is a
Yes.
moment where we, as the child who isn't probably an adult,
Mhm.
um, really become someone different in that moment. And the
Yes.
lessons that we've learned from our parent flood into us in a way that we didn't know was going to happen. It's like if you're a parent, and especially as a mother, the birth of your child does that too. Like, that moment of giving birth is that moment of knowing love in a way that you never have before. And
Yes.
so when we share these moments and from that place of vulnerability, but also strength, what happens with our audience is they are in that moment understanding something in a way they never could have, and they connect with us and want to know more.
Wow. This is you're sharing things that I think I knew, but never really have thought of them in the way that you are presenting them. And you've gotten my creative juices flowing so much. And even talking about your mother and then speaking from the scars and not the wound. And then there's just so much in there. There's like a thousand questions running through my brain right now. Like you, I lost my mother a couple of years ago as well. And um, I am just now to the point where I can speak about it more. And she died in our home, so there's a lot there.
Yeah.
And now I've lost both parents and my brother. So it's a story
A
that
lot.
and it is interwoven, and it isn't something I have spoken about a lot. I speak about my brother a lot. That is I lost him in 2010, or I should say we, our family.
Yeah.
And, um but weaving all of the pieces together is something that is more recent because and you just brought it home to me, I couldn't speak from these wounds that kept being pulled open.
Mhm.
I had to wait.
My mom died in February of 22, and I was a keynote speaker for a global brand, doing a global keynote in March. And
Wow.
I actually opened with the story of her death. And it was a powerful, for me, it was part of my healing. Um, and the reason I told that story was because of what she meant. It was International Women's Day. The keynote was on International Women's
Oh.
Day. And so being able to remember her
Mhm.
so quickly after her death, but also to be able to see the gift in it was so powerful for me. And I didn't go deeply into it, but I went into it enough to be in that moment with her.
Yeah.
And, I think that, and the feedback that I got after that talk was incredible because I think so many people had experienced, my mom actually died of COVID. And so, we were just at the end, of course, of that.
Yes.
And so being able to share that with so many people who had also experienced that and to have
Mhm.
that shared moment, but also to, like I said, to see the beauty of it,
Yeah.
was really, really powerful. And in the years since like I said, I do revisit it from time to time, and I see myself changing, and I see myself, through what she gave to me. And I think that that is part of the healing that these stories give us. The more we tell stories that are hard to tell, the more we change and learn and find the gift that lives inside of these difficult situations.
Yeah. Whew, there's a lot there, and I am so sorry for your loss. That's it.
Thank you.
You're
Yeah.
welcome. You're very welcome.
And
And
you as well. You know, like I think we share, and this is the thing, these are shared moments, right?
yes, yes, they are. And as you shared your story, my mother died of colorectal cancer with COVID on top of
Yeah.
that. And so I immediately feel this connection of we both know this pain, although not identical because we have different details in our lives, but a shared pain. And I know there are many, many, many people that share this pain.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And being able to speak about it is um a gift. And well, let me ask it this. I'm going to say this as a question. How do you help people pull out those details as you just shared some of those details? How how do you help people really pull out those details because our brains like to block pain.
Absolutely.
So we have to
Well,
find
yeah,
Mm.
what I do is, well, first of all, we identify what the story is. So where in your life are you going? So let's find that first. And then what we do when you're telling a story, the most powerful way to tell a story is to be in it, first person. So where are you? Look around you in your mind's eye. Where are you in this story? Are you in a room? Are you outside? What are you
Mm,
thinking? What are you seeing? What are you smelling? What are you hearing? What are you tasting? What are you touching? So take all the sensory pieces. So you situate yourself, but also the audience, right? So we are there with you. So they start there. And then what we're doing once we are somewhere. So for you as the storyteller, now the details start to become clearer, right? Because you're in the story. You're not trying to remember it from the outside. So we start with the environment. We're then moving into, well, who's there with you? Who's part of this story?
mm,
Right? Who are the characters? And characters aren't just like my friend, it's my friend Jim, or my, and tell me a little bit about that person, my friend Jim, who I've known for 20 years and who's my dearest friend ever. So now we know a little bit about the characters. So we're coming into this story and we're bringing the listener into the story. But even when we're building it in this way. So we've got the details, right? Then it's like, okay, what's the reason you're telling this story? What is the point? What's going on? What's the happening? And there's a couple of ways in which we're building that sort of point, because one is that's why you're telling the story. So
mhm.
maybe it's about, again, about love and loss. I'll just use that as an example because it's such a universal thing. So perhaps you're telling a breakup story as an example because you're using that to show that not everybody is meant for us, and in fact that breakup story was the best thing that happened because the next person you met was your husband or whatever it is. So we're telling it through the lens of that. So that might be that, this was, you thought was the love of your life. So perhaps the purpose of that story is, I'm telling you this story because this person, I thought was destined for me. I thought they were perfect. So there's the reason you're telling the story. But what we want to do then is build in what I call the raising of the stakes, or the and then moment. What happened? So we go from the environment of the story, where is it happening, to who's in the story, to the reason you're telling the story, to then a tension point, a raising
Mm,
of the stakes. Something happened. Now, in building it that way, that tension point, sometimes you have many, right? So you go back and forth. You might go back and then you have a second tension point, and then maybe even a third tension point, and you're
mm,
really kind of teasing, the listener of with
yeah,
what's going to happen. But in that tension point, what you're doing is you're setting yourself up to allow yourself to deliver an idea, because it's in that tension point that now the audience knows a little bit about you, a little bit about that story. They've discovered, sort of this idea, sort of what's happening in this story. Now, whatever the idea is you're delivering it, you deliver it at the point of the tension, because
yeah.
what you've just done is you've used the story as the context or the backdrop for an idea. And that's
Mm,
how you build an idea-centric story. And if you're doing that as part of a talk or a presentation, that's actually where you're now transitioning into the body of your talk or presentation, because what's happening, you don't go to the end of that story. You leave them in a moment where they're wondering, because later you're going to come back to that when you're finishing your talk or presentation, and you're going to finish that story, but you want to bring them back to that emotional point. So the tension point is the key of getting the listener to a place of an emotional engagement where they hear this idea. It suddenly often will hit them like a ton of bricks of, oh my God, I never thought of it that way, right? They get a little distracted from the story, although not fully. They're waiting for you to finish it. And so they're listening intently, and you're bringing other parts of that story all through your presentation or talk, but you're never going back to that one place, because that's
Yes.
where you close it. And that allows you to then re-deliver your idea again.
So we're leaving them with a cliffhanger.
That's it. That's it. That you do finish,
Yes.
but you're ready to tell it, right?
Yeah.
So it is a powerful way to be a storyteller, because
Yep.
what you do, and this is, I studied oh, Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who is the author of Women Who Runs with Wolves, a
Okay.
fantastic book. And she's also got another one called Mother Night. And she is just an incredible, incredible storyteller. And she talks about stories within stories. And that's the way you do stories within stories, because you create sort of a meta story that lives on top of it. That's your opening. But then you're going to have little stories that live inside of it. And then you come back to your meta story. And suddenly it all comes together. I mean, I can only hope to be as good a storyteller as Clarissa someday, but that's where I learned that concept.
Yes, it's beautiful. I my background, my undergraduate degrees are in music. And we talked about resolution all the time. And in theory classes and music theory classes, we had to resolve. You had to resolve that structure, but it didn't have to be right away.
That's it.
You
That's
could
it.
resolve
Because
it much later.
and in music, I mean, this is so beautiful in music, right? When we come to those moments where we want it to resolve and it doesn't, that's
Yes.
where oh, we love it, right? Because now
Yes.
it's like we can't stop listening until we hear it, because we
Yes.
know it's coming. We know it will resolve at some
Yes.
point. And when it does, that's the moment where the music just, we fall into the harmony, and it's
Yes.
beautiful. Actually,
Yes.
the salon that I did last week, I had two speakers who were speaking at it as well. And one of them was a musician, and she was talking about the healing power of music. And we had built a talk. She's a classical guitarist. And so her talk, we interspersed her playing guitar with her talk. And so it's exactly what we were doing. We used the song Hallelujah, which is such a beautiful,
Yes.
beautiful song. And so she would come to different points in the harmony where, she would leave us waiting for that moment, and then would go into her talk and then come back to it. And it was so powerful.
Yes. Wow, that's just because then you're waiting for a story resolution and a music resolution at the same time.
Yeah, it was
That's
so beautiful.
glorious.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is glorious.
Music is something that is so,
Yeah.
and when you can do the two, when you can have almost, I love doing that singer-songwriter feel, even
Yeah.
though it wasn't a song she was talking about, because she was telling us her story, she was telling us a lot, but being able to have it with music was such a powerful, powerful way
Yeah.
of adding to the backdrop of that story.
Yes. Well, you've given me so much to think about, all of us, so much to think about. And our time, I don't know how time goes so fast. Well, it's because of people like you. I could sit and listen and learn from you for hours. So we'll have to have you back, Andrea, because I know there's so much more that we could share or that you could share. And but before we end this one, let's go into a journal prompt, a writing prompt for our listeners.
Sure. So I think a great journal prompt is to start off with, what is the impact, or what is the legacy I want to leave in
Mhm.
this world?
That's deep. What is the legacy or impact you want to leave in this world? I think when we come back to record part 2 of this podcast, we should start there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes, definitely. I don't even have to write that down. We're just going to remember to do that. And what is your version? Everyone on this podcast gets to ask this question. Your version of your pow pow shoes. What are you pow powing out in the world?
Oh, I am pow-powing absolutely that we have a hopeful future. This is something I talk about all the time, and it's actually through the lens of diversity of thought leadership. I
Mhm.
continually talk about the fact that, we need to have diverse thought leaders creating our future so the future can be reflective of the diversity of our world. And we know that when we have a diversity, we have more strength. Nature shows us that all the time. And so let's have our human existence reflected in the diversity of the world that we're creating together, because it is a co-creation.
Yes, awesome. Oh my gosh. How can everyone listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, how can we connect with you?
You can absolutely follow me here on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, I have a channel called the Thought Leader Academy, where I do bi-week or twice a week we do videos. I'm on LinkedIn. Follow me on LinkedIn. I'm live almost every day on LinkedIn. I live stream something called a Thought of the Day, and every 2 weeks I have something called Conversations with Thought Leaders. And join
Mm.
my mailing list. We have a biweekly newsletter. We're sending out resources all the time. So just go to talkboutique.com and sign up for our newsletter.
Yes, and I will make sure all of those links are below either the video or the podcast on the podcast stations, however you are listening and or watching this. Head to the show notes, grab the links, and start following Andrea. She is amazing. I wish, if you're only listening, I wish you could see her. So really do head to YouTube and check this amazing woman out. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today on Coffee and Tea with CarrieVee.
Well, thank you, Carrie. This has been an absolute pleasure and joy. I have so enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. I have as well. Thank you.